Well, anyway, I was kind of like looking at the information, and normally um, recording videos on my mobile phone normally hasn't until like yay today presented a limitation. I don't go for that. I don't believe a thing about it. Anyway, so anyway, anyway, I was like looking at the thing about intellectual being used in that way, and ultimately it got to something about the Houston, Texas area, and all the African Americans are like some consonants minus J's, and kind of like I spent a lot of time about the pi r squared and 3.1416, and in combination with the advantage love 30 and the marginal spread of a tennis court, and like a ground rule double in that way. In tennis, having a mandatory requirement of 2 consecutive scores to even be eligible to meet the requirements to be allowed to score the winning point in the games. But anyway, Vantage Love 30 seemed to be like, it about marginal spread in the way of terminology, going all the way to like the New York Stock Exchange, and the baseball field about the ground rule double, ultimately getting in my mind a 90-degree right angle thing, ultimately getting to yes, American Amplified Living Bible, yeah, amazingly true, yeah. So like automatically a baseball feels like a quadrant of like globalization, the globe being divided in spherical quadrants the shape of a football on like the entire globe. It was like the shape of a football, or hey, the oval office, yeah. So like a re-entering heaven, like in the Book of Thessalonians, yeah, and the Transfiguration on Mount Olives thing, yeah. So anyway, like getting to the thing about the reputable standards of consensual participation. Anyway, so like it's getting on to the thing about the ground rule double, and like baseball being a 90-degree right angle, or a compass being due west, 90-degree right angle in that way of what 90 is to a right angle. 90, or like in geographically, a thing about location of like Brazoria, or the list goes on and on about the 90 thing. But in any case, so like the ground rule double is kind of like the tennis ball and the baseball, and the seams are in combination like virtually identical but different and distinctively different in its practical application. But the ground rule double being the principle of baseball of a 90-degree right angle, and like a marginal spread of terminology of international. The word really doesn't have to be international financial management, but in globalization, as far as including the tennis ball and the baseball, and compatibility between a marginal spread of terminology, normally sometimes even associated with like a high-end yields and returns that way, or even sometimes tools, devices, and mechanisms as bartering and trading, representation, in stock exchange, that way of investments, and annuities, securities, annuities, in that acronym. Well, anyway, while I'm on acronym thing, it's kind of like looking at the thing about the sovereign immunity and governmental amnesty, because I was having a thing about reading the entire Black's Law Dictionary. In any case, yeah. So like back to the century thing, and the Houston area thing of subconstants minus J's, minus 36 thing, and oil and oat, and 36, and there's considerable amount more, but in any case, yeah. So the 36 with a remainder of 64, predominantly 64 being like an American, alphanumerically, okay, or something about the 36 and 64 equating to 100, a centennial. And I've been looking at the pi r squared thing about the advantage love 30 thing, and secret de facto advantage love, what de facto is, if litigation really has to even be the word. But normally, with what I was looking at as far as like de facto in the United States Supreme Court, Southwest Court Report, predominantly as far as like Supreme Court proceedings, predominantly with General Motors, with the word de facto, okay? Ultimately, in my mind, a stationary engineer thing, and what all that means, parked in the driveway, in a way of like what HOA is, and General Motors Acceptance Corporation, and the acronyms of 24 of HOA and GMC, and the International Electrical Electronic Engineering being the 24, and the big O thing equating to 39. And anyway, like I was reading the thing about, I was like keying on like acronyms. Well, anyway, I got to that exclusionary rule provision, and in my mind, something very much of like sovereign immunities, governmental amnesties, and executive powers in that way, because I was like really targeting my thoughts predominantly on international financial management, and international monetary funding, and the United States amendments of like having the right to assemble, as compared to the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press being representative of distinguishable. I mean, if there's a difference between legal media and live on air as compared to deposition as maybe a sword trial, or not necessarily a sword trial, but verifiable, like video, what that is to a national deficit, and available in closed caption for the hearing impaired kind of like thing. Anyway, so like I was looking at the terminology involving ultimately teleprompting, and the thing about the attenuation, and affirmation, like the UA thing, like when the UA thing is taken out of the word attenuation, it's like attention, the absolute salute thing, in the way of what absolute values are. Predominantly, even the Fred Flintstone wheels, ultimately getting to the pi r squared, and normally finding pi r squared using the radius, ultimately getting the diameter of a circle presents the circumference of a flat plane surface. And anything like a two-dimensional reality of flat plane surfaces being two-dimensional, and isometrics involved of three-dimensional of actual participation, it gets into the volume, and normally identified with a cylindrical shape that normally is considered three-dimensional above the flat plane. Anything above the surface is like three-dimensional, like the cylindrical, in that way identified normally as volume, and what volume is, and what cylindrical deals to like Fred Flintstone, I mean for real, and what a cartoon is to entertainment, or even Neptune is the pen mightier than a sword, kind of like thing with even a Mickey Mantle thing about the swordfish, the pen mightier than a sword, huh? So it's kind of like all of a sudden it's like a Pinocchio thing and a pi r squared thing. Again, even a Mercedes-Benz like fortune cookie, and something about the litmus paper, and ultimately innovation leading the way with cutting edge technology seems to be even a Mercedes-Benz fortune cookie being a 180 and a 360 thing of a fortune cookie. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, truthfully so, but in that way, it's kind of like my memory of like involved with like pH levels, and what pH degree normally requires like a 6-year degree. Normally in my mind, not necessarily that it has to be liquidal equity, but there's something about just the thing about the degree, and what dictates liquidal equity, and in a way that way. Not that it has to be or is. It's just that it's just simple pronunciation, and the ambiguity, the ambiguous thing about the diction, or practical application and principle. Yeah. So anyway, so like I was like looking at that Wyatt Earp and the ERP, and the subconscious mind's chase equating to like 181 in Houston, Texas, a Pearland, Texas home, and we international. Selective service, I'm not really trying to focus on selective service, but truthfully, I might not, but really. Anyway, in the one at 181, or what attenuation USA to like processing speed means to teleprompting, a thing about inside the courtroom of like measuring cycles per second in frequency, which would be almost like the limit of the 13 band graphic equalizer and the 13 colonies of American history, or the 13 stars above the eagle, the 30 thing, Vantage Love 30, and the marginal spread thing, a map, a baby, a Bible, and all the connectivity about what equal employment opportunity means to, copyright law in a way of access, and what intellectual and how fair use is something ridiculously not really a normal thought of how law is practiced. But yeah, I was kind of like looking at that, the OPEC, the acronym OPEC, being 39, like ERP and ERP and Angel and all that stuff about NY and the New York thing, right? Well, anyway, so I was like looking at the acronym in 39 in that way by comparison, okay? But I'm going to see if there's going to be a thing popping up on my screen. But yeah, so all that about the attenuation, the UA, and attended and 140 of attenuation um, of Appomattox USA and all that stuff about processing speed between teleprompting and waveform